Suppose we look at this formula, cost plus margin equals selling price. Let's say we pay $300 for something, we mark it up $100, and we sell it for $400. We call this our cost, we call this our margin, markup, gross profit. There's a lot of things you can call it. I'm going to call it margin. The book uses the word M and they use the word markup, but that's a little bit ambiguous, so I'm going to call it the margin. And basically, if someone does this in his or her business, oftentimes we're going to say, I have to know percentage-wise, what to mark things up to stay in business. Now, there's two ways of doing this. Some businesses base their markup on cost. A markup based on cost looks like this. The word that comes after on is the base. It's the 100%. If something's on cost, that means it's based on cost. If we say somebody needs a 35% markup on cost, that means cost is the base. That means cost is the 100%. The first thing I ever do in any of these problems, I use the formula cost plus margin equals selling price, and I look in the problem and say, what's the base? What comes after the word on? It's either going to be cost or it's going to be selling price. If it's cost, I put the letter C right here by the margin so that I remind myself that it's a margin based on cost. Then I put 100% under the cost and I put the letter C here, and I put the letter C here, and I put the letter C here. I put it all over the place so that I know that it's based on cost. Now, where would I put this 35%? Is that the margin or is that the selling price? That's the margin, isn't it? That's a 35% margin. Pardon? Yes, it calls it markup, and I'm going to tell you why I don't like that word. Markup is fine when you're talking about based on cost, because we are marking it up. Let's say we buy something for $300. We are going to mark it up 30%, 35% based on cost. Notice what this letter C does. When you see something in parentheses next to something else, what does that mean mathematically? It means multiply. So if we take 35% times the cost, that'll give us the margin. The margin is 35% times the cost. So everybody punch in 300 times 35%. 105, okay, good. Now, if they asked us for the selling price, we would just add those two together, wouldn't we? In these grids, first number plus second number always equals third number. So we get 405 as our selling price. Now, they're not going to ask us this, but what if we wanted to know what percent goes here? First number plus second number equals third number. This is 135% of the cost, isn't it? Because it's bigger than the cost. Markups based on cost are exactly like percent increase. In other words, when 30 goes up to 405, it went up 105. How significant is that? Well, let's compare it with what it used to be. Take 105 and divide it by 300, you'll get 0.35. That's a 35% increase when 300 goes up to 405. So the math is just like percent increase when we base it on cost. And the picture looks like this. Here's our cost, which is 100%. We add 35% margin to that, and we end up with a number that's bigger than both of those, that's our selling price, and that's 135% of the cost. So markup based on cost is just like percent increase. It's just like saying we bought something and we paid 35% tax on it, and that's how much we wrote the check for. The math is all the same. We're just giving it different terms. Now, who would base their markup on cost? Anybody who knows what their cost is, but doesn't know what it's going to sell for. A manufacturer would base their margin on cost. They know exactly how much each of these little pieces cost that goes into that thing. They know exactly how much their labor costs to produce that thing. They know how much it costs to get it off the line, to put it on the pallets, to run the forklift around. So they know their cost. But once they ship it out to the retailer, they have no idea what that retailer is going to sell it for. So a manufacturer is going to base their markups on cost. Now, much of the world, much of the businesses in the world base their margin on cost. Most retail businesses, however, base their margin on selling price. Let's look at a very similar situation where we say, this business, we pay $300 for a widget. We pay $300 for a widget. To stay in business, we need a 35% margin on selling price. Find the selling price and the margin, or the markup. Now, the numbers are exactly the same as the previous problem. The only thing that's different are these words coming after the word on. This 35% is no longer on cost. It's on selling price. It's on selling price. Every one of these percentages is based on the selling price. Now, why would somebody do it this way? A retailer would do it this way because a retailer bases their inventory on the selling price. They base their commissions on the selling price. So it makes sense to base their margin on the selling price. If I'm a retailer and I have 4 identical items on the shelf, am I going to sell those for different prices? No, they're all going to have the same price tag on them. But what if I bought this one a year ago, this one 6 months ago, this one 2 months ago, and this one yesterday? I might have paid 4 different prices for those items, but I'm going to sell them for the same thing. So it makes a lot more sense for me to base my margins on the selling price, because that's much more of a constant for me. Now let's see how the numbers work. Does this 300, is that the cost, the margin, or the selling price? If that's what I, the retailer, paid for that widget.
It's the cost. Don't sell it for more than you paid, right?
If Joe's Hardware pays $300 for this widget, that's going to be Joe's cost on it. Okay, so the 300 goes here, and now we're trying to find how much his margin is and what he's going to sell it for. They're always going to give us 2 of these numbers, but they really give us a third number, because whatever words they put after the word on, that tells us where the 100 goes, where the 100% goes. So 100% in this case goes under the selling price. That's the key to all these problems, is making sure you get the 100%. It's either going to go under the selling price if it says selling price, or it's going to go under the cost if it says percent on cost. Okay? So if you don't get the 100% in the right place, you can't get the right answer. So I can take 35% times that 300, right? Well, no, because this says 35% times the selling price. I can take 35% times the selling price to get the margin. But I don't know the selling price. Does this look familiar? What if I knew this percent? Then I could take the top number and divide it by the bottom percent, and it would give me the base, the 100%. So if first thing plus second thing has to be third thing, what number goes here? What percent? 100 minus 35. That's exactly right. 65%. So $300 equals 65% of the selling price. So to find the selling price, I take this top number and divide it by this bottom percent. So take 300 divided by 65%. Now that should give us a bigger number than 300, right? We got to sell it for more than what we paid or we're going to go out of business really quickly. What do we get? 461? 54? All right, thank you. Does that look good to everybody? 46154 to the nearest penny. Now, if they asked us what's the dollar markup, we could just subtract, couldn't we? And that's what we should do. Once we find this, we should subtract so that everything is exact to the penny. So let's subtract, and we'd get 161.54. Now, just out of curiosity, let's see how close it checks. 35% times that selling price should be this. It might be off by a penny because we might have rounded this. So let's try 461.54 times 35%. Is it this number to the nearest penny or is it a penny off? It's a penny off. Okay. That's okay. It could be a penny off. But notice, once we find this number, because we rounded it, we don't want to multiply it times this, because this plus that has to be that number to the penny. All right? But if it's only a penny off when we check it, then we're pretty sure that's due to the rounding error, not to any mistake we made. Now, the reason I don't like using the word markup when it's based on selling price is we didn't mark anything up 35%. We took the selling price and marked it down 30% to get our cost. That's what's really going on mathematically. Margin based on selling price is exactly like percent decrease. The selling price is the biggest thing, that's the 100%. The margin is smaller than that, it's the 35%. And the cost is smaller than the selling price, it's the 65%. When 461.54 goes down to 300, that's a 35% decrease. Take this number and knock 35% off it and you get that number. So it's really like a mark down. It's like saying, here was the list price, we had a 35% off sale, you get it for 300. So that's why a mathematician doesn't like the word mark up when you're really talking about a mark down. So margin is kind of neutral, that goes either way. Any question on that? The key to this whole chapter is getting that 100% in the right place. So just remember, whatever comes after the word on, if it's on cost, you can think of that as based on cost, which means cost is the base, and the base is 100%. Okay, so you put the 100% either under the cost or under the selling price, depending on whatever the problem says. They'll tell you. All right, so that's markup based on cost, markup based on selling price.